My name is Sarah Henry, the host of The Activist Lawyer, offering a platform for lawyers to share their story and journey into law and activism. Guests will discuss the challenges and highlights of their work, as well as important cases, opinions on legal and political matters, and will offer advice and tips for anyone interested in pursuing a career in human rights law, public interest law, or criminal justice, among others. So tune in and engage with us, and please share and review where possible so we can keep bringing you insightful episodes featuring fantastic guests. I am delighted today to be joined by Keio Yoshida, who is joining me from the big smoke of Belfast today on the Activist Lawyer podcast. Welcome, Keio.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. And I know you're just up the road from us today because you're here for the Arts Festival and, of course, to talk about your new book that we'll get into in a little bit of detail later on in the podcast. But first, I'm wondering, can you take us back a little bit in time and tell us where it all began in terms of your journey into law? And, was there a specific event or a person that inspired you to get into law and, of course, your practice, which is human rights?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. And I'm really, I work as a barrister in London and I meet people and they tell me stories like they've wanted to be a barrister ever since they were 3 years old. I wasn't one of those people. I went to university and I applied for all different things in my UCAS, as it was called then. I was interested in history and literature and lots of different things. And I ended up studying law because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I thought it could be something that would interest me. And once I started, I found it absolutely fascinating about this area of study which impacts so many people and impacts all of our lives. And then I was about 21 years old, and a person who was very, very significant in my life called Professor Conor Geardy, he took me aside and he passed away recently. And he said, Keio, you should be a barrister. You'd be really good at it. And that was the reason I started to apply to Chambers and to become a barrister. So these mentors that we have in our lives are just so important. And I'm really grateful to have had some wonderful people to kind of shepherd me along the way.
Wow, yes. And he did recently pass away. And then, of course, human rights is your kind of core practice. Why did you choose that? And, what type of work do you have on at the minute and what's interesting you at the minute in that context?
Yeah, when I was studying law, I really hated it. I hated land law. I hated contract law. I kind of had this image of law being a bit like Ally McBeal or something. And then a lot of it is really tedious. But then I discovered human rights law, and it was really that aha moment where I thought, actually, this is what I want to do. I want to use the law as a tool for social justice. And that's what I've done throughout my career. I've worked in NGOs, I've worked in academic spaces, and now I'm at the bar. And, right now I'm instructed mainly in the area of inquests and inquiries and human rights cases. And I'm doing kind of restraints in prisons, deaths in state custody. That's what I do. And I'm really passionate about making sure that those who are most vulnerable in society, have their rights upheld, and that families get answers over state conduct.
Brilliant work. So, Keio, you've just released your second book, Pride and Prejudices, Queer Lives and the Law. You're widely published, having co-authored and authored reviews, articles, and another book, Silenced Women. In Pride and Prejudices, you mention how the law, which is meant to protect, often fails to do that and falls short and actually discriminates against marginalised groups. I'm wondering what inspired you to write the books and why now?
I really am passionate about people being able to have access to information about the law and about their legal rights. So it's not very often you get to go and speak to a barrister and find out what your rights are or what the law says about a certain topic. We live in an age now, it's, there's social media, it's incredible. There's lots of people who are activists online who are posting things about the law, but often there are areas of law which are really complex and you do need things to be explained to you. And so, with both my books, what I wanted to do, my first one was written with Jen Robinson, who's my colleague at Chambers, and this other book, Pride and Prejudices, is to talk about, well, what's wrong with the law and how we can fix it. So, in the case of silenced women, it's looking at how the law punishes women who speak out with allegations of abuse. And with this book, I wanted to do something slightly different. I wanted to tell both a personal story, but also the legal story of the history of LGBTQ rights in the law. Because I know when I was a young law student, I found Helena Kennedy's book, Eve Was Framed, and it really inspired me at that time to think about gender in the law. And I wanted to write something that perhaps my 15-year-old self would have been able to read and to think, actually, this speaks to me. This could be part of my journey.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. I mean, the book will feature in our next Activist Lawyer Book Club, which is brilliant. And I think I got that from the book as well. I mean, it is such an engaging read because there is that biographical element that you spoke about, but also delving into, the legal landscape across different jurisdictions, which is tricky. It's hard to navigate. And while other countries are making strides, others are very regressive and, in fact, becoming more regressive in certain respects, which really go through in detail in your book, but also using real lived experiences of others. And very often when we think about LGBTQ plus rights and the law, we're looking at criminalisation perhaps, but your book explores how restrictions within the law or how the failure of law to protect people really impacts their daily lives and their day-to-day routine and families in particular, So was that important to you that you were able to show other lived experiences and really get that message out there that it's not just all about criminalisation and decriminalisation, it's about a clear impact on people's lives?
That's absolutely right. I mean, decriminalisation is the first step. It's something that absolutely has to happen because it's, that's the police going into your bedrooms. It's a really extreme part of a state apparatus to criminalize people on the basis of who they are. Once you undo that, there's so many other legal laws and regulations that impact on our lives. And I think family is one that really struck for me because, and I tell the story in the book about when I'm a really, really young human rights lawyer at the time. I'm in my first job and I go out to Mexico and I meet Judge Karen Atala, who is a Chilean LGBTQ trailblazer. And I meet her and she tells me that she lost, as a judge, she lost the custody of her 4 children on the basis that the courts, including the Supreme Court of Chile, said that she was a lesbian and therefore, couldn't have the custody of her children. And this is back in 2008. And then that goes to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. But you still see those cases coming up in Strasbourg today, year after year. This isn't something we've relegated to the past. In the book, I try and give cultural references because not everyone's going to go and read a legal case. But you might watch a movie or you might read a book. So there's one by Constance Debray called Love Me Tender, which she talks about. She's a lawyer who also goes through a custody battle in relation to her child. And she says that she lost custody for a while on the basis of her sexuality as well. And that's really recently. So I wanted to kind of, in the book, I wanted to go from coming out to kind of living our adult lives and all the things that for a lot of heterosexual people are just normal. It's the Disney, you meet someone, you fall in love, you get married, you have your kids, happy ever after, but actually for queer people, coming out is just the start and then everything is a battle.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really referenced through the cross-border element of the book as well, showing how in one country you can access IVF treatment if you're married, in another country, and it really, it's mind-blowing how we're still at this stage and how it really impacts where people choose to live, how they choose to live, how many children, if they want children. So I really liked how you delved into those real lived experiences and something that everybody can relate to and think, wow, we are so behind and there's so much work that needs to be done. And Another point of your book that I enjoyed was that you discussed the importance of language, also referring to very outdated terminology, which is still used today and has to be used in certain contexts when it's referring to historical cases, I guess. But you emphasise the need for individuals to express, their identity authentically. Why is language so important when it comes to advancing LGBTQ plus rights?
I guess there's two things I want to say about language. The first is sometimes I hear people say, oh, it's, LGBTQ plus AA plus, it's so complicated. I don't know what it is that we're talking about. What is non-binary identity? And yeah, everybody is very happy to talk about AI, deep fakes, tweets, selfies. We, as a society, all the time we update our vocabulary to reflect our lived reality. So that's kind of one thing. I don't buy that. I don't buy that just because it's about LGBTQ rights. It's more difficult. In terms of the law's always catching up with these innovations in vocabulary. And I would say actually when it comes to queer identities, these identities have always existed, but the law has just been really bad at reflecting that. But we're seeing today, the law is all about language, and the types of decisions that are being made today that impact our communities' lives are about that language. So we have to pay attention to it. If you look at For Women Scotland, it's about what a woman means in terms of the Equality Act. If you look at the Freddie McConnell case, it's about what is mother, what's the definition of motherhood. And if we look at other areas of the law as well, like defamation law, meaning is you have separate meaning tribes. So I think one of the things I just wanted to highlight in the book is how key language is when we're talking about rights and the law, and how much work we still need to do, and that it's not something that we can just shut off. There are other things that we could do. So, for example, we might think about introducing the term gestational parent into the law. Yeah. So what the book does is it talks about some of these difficulties, but then potential solutions as well that might be more embracing of lived queer realities.
Yeah, and even in that, some of the examples that are referenced in the book refer to maybe respecting how somebody wants to identify as well. And although we might, as you said, it's important to recognise different terms and terminology and to update our language, whether it's within the law or just in general speak. But it's really important to understand how somebody wants to identify. And even there's reference to, the term trans, and some people who are members of the trans community are actually over that term now as well, because it has this aspect of a transitionary period that's in movement, and they're actually happy in their life now and how they identify themselves. So I thought that was just so interesting, and it really makes us think. And it also reminds me of the book, I'm not sure if you read it, Kubra Gumise, who wrote on speaking and being, how language binds and frees us. And it really reminded me of how that author goes through the importance again and how communities themselves identify before colonialism came into place, and you do reference that in the book as well, and how laws have introduced these kind of derogatory terms as well that communities didn't know before, and it wasn't an issue. So that was just, that historical piece was really interesting.
Yeah, it's something that I learned a lot from. I worked with the Human Dignity Trust and this incredible Sri Lankan activist called Rosanna Flama Caldera, and we brought the case to the UN CEDAW committee. It's the Committee on of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. And that is a case where, you saw the vestiges of colonialism impact Sri Lanka, and that still exists today. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, and it's something people generally wouldn't really think about. So to make that connection, it makes sense as well. And although with the book we're looking at the law and regressions and of course great strides in the law, there's a lot to be celebrated in the book as well. But what I really liked as well is that you do reference musical number ones that maybe take us back in time to a particular point, which, makes it for easy reading as well, because we can all relate to kind of our timelines to the changes and the advances in law, and especially looking at Ireland as well, which we'll get to. But what has the reception been like in terms of, the release of this book? How have people been receiving it? Have you got lots of work to do in terms of promotion? And I know you're doing events in Belfast.
So overall, it's been really great. It's been wonderful. I've been going to literature festivals. I was just at the Edinburgh Book Festival, which is incredible. And I'm really excited to be back in Belfast. I've had really, really nice messages, I think, from young people just reaching out just to say kind of thank you, to say that they cried when they read the book, and that's been really heartwarming. At the other end, I've had really nice words and emails come in from the Honourable Michael Kirby in Australia, from Justice Edwin Cameron in South Africa, who's a retired Constitutional Court judge. And that's just really incredible as well, that these people that you admire so much and they've done so much work as judges and people to change perceptions and prejudices. So it's great. But promotion of books, it's difficult. You never know how it's going to go. But I walked into Gay is the Word the other day in London, which is one of my favourite bookshops, and I saw my book there, and it was just a really wonderful moment.
Amazing. Well, you and I both share the experience of growing up in Northern Ireland during a time when the Good Friday Agreement was a major turning point for us all. So focusing on our little part of the world. Despite progress in many areas, thankfully peace, the region has historically been described as, I think, ultra-conservative in many respects, particularly on issues of equality and human rights. So how do you see the progress of LGBTQ plus rights here today? And, how maybe young people and the community should be more supported?
This is it's such an interesting question. Because a lot of the book is actually in Northern Ireland, and it talks Northern Irish cases, and a lot of the cases that have set precedent on LGBTQ rights, say before the UK courts, have come from Northern Ireland. The Asher's Bakery case, Dudgeon became a global precedent. So it's a really small place, but I think has played this really outsized role in terms of LGBTQ rights. In terms of today, it's hard to know because I don't live there, and people on the ground will know much better. But obviously there have been massive changes from when we were growing up. There's marriage equality has come in, and gay adoption, and the decriminalization of abortion. So really important strides. But I still think there's a long way to go, and I think I do think it is still really difficult for people. I think it's the law around trans identity it is not what it is in the South. And also I think, the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission has also done really important work on the need for better comprehensive sexual and reproductive rights education in schools. So it's not about, yes, there's been great changes, but we can't rest on our laurels.
Yeah.
And I've been really saddened, and this is a different topic, but to see the race riots happening in Northern Ireland. And, I grew up as someone who, things got thrown at me and I was told to go home when I was young, and that was a problem that I did hope that was something that we'd relegated to the past as we've moved towards a society which I think is more open and tolerant and peaceful. But we've got work to do.
We've got work to do. And as we record today, obviously there's been rioting in Dublin as well last night and the night before. And I know that you'd spent time there, obviously, as a student, and you go back there in the book as well. I'm just wondering, from a global perspective, looking at Ireland in terms of how it's viewed, I suppose particularly in light of the referendum legalising same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I mean, Ireland's story is just incredible. I lived there I studied at Trinity, so that was where I had my legal education, and it was not a welcoming place at all to be queer at that time. And then in a really short space of time, it becomes the first country in the world to hold a referendum on marriage equality. At the same time, 2015, it passes the law on self-determination for trans people. So you get this kind of real sense. And I spoke to some of the Irish activists who were canvassing in that referendum. One of them, Aisling, said this incredible thing, like with the referendum, like Ireland came out of the closet. Yeah. And it really, it was really nice. And, talking about Dublin Castle being lit up in the rainbow colours. And so it's been a really wonderful, positive story of reform in that one country that I wanted to show how change can happen in a really quick space of time because of people on the ground, activism, people going from door to door, having cups of teas with their grannies, that's what people talked about.
I did it, and it was such a positive experience for all of us involved. I later worked on Repeal the Eighth, slightly different again, but a very positive, engaging campaign. And I remember also being tasked to help some politicians as well go through the legislation to know what would need to be changed in light of the referendum. So there was a lot of work behind the scenes, but I think overall a very, very positive campaign, which was wonderful to be part of and wonderful to see. So I suppose a question that we ask everybody, our Activist Lawyer podcast has its name from, I suppose, derogatory terms cast at immigration lawyers in particular. And I'm wondering, just in your experience, how do you see activism and the law intersect to create, I suppose, meaningful societal change? And what role does each play in shaping legal protections that we rely on?
I really agree with you that there's this negative connotation around activism. Even when, I used to teach first year law school, you would talk about judicial activism, and a lot of the readings around it are negative, so judges need to be neutral, everyone has to be neutral. But I think it's really important to say that activism isn't coming from one side. All different sides of the political spectrum understand the law as a vehicle for change. And therefore, if you don't work with the law to make change, you're going to get screwed over by the law. Will end up then entrenching prejudice. And so that's why ensuring that the law, has a human rights framework, is alive to racial injustice and gender injustice and homophobia is so important. And I think, in the book I talk about Victoria McLeod's speech that she made in Belfast a long time ago about the importance of the rainbow lives of the law. And I think it's important that we need to work with the law. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but to ensuring that outcomes are better for people and we live in a just and equitable society. Isn't that what we all want?
Exactly, for everybody. Just finally, I guess, anybody who's been inspired by your work and who are interested in following in a similar path and maybe looking at the work that you do, what advice might you give them as they start their journey into law?
So I guess there's two aspects to this. One, I kind of think is like the very boring answer that I give to people that I mentor or that might ask me this question. And I'd say, put your head down. Work hard at university, get your grades, read case law, read case law not only from your jurisdiction, but from other jurisdictions as well. I think a comparative perspective is really enriching. And then, find the area of law that you're passionate about, find your niche. And it doesn't matter whether that's, it might be tax law that does it for you. It might be immigration, human rights. It doesn't matter. There's a place for everyone in the law. And I think it is a really rewarding career. And that you meet incredible people. The other thing I'd also say is, be good to the peers in your class because they will become your colleagues and they will become your opponents. So, just remember that you will grow up with them and they will be your professional colleagues for life.
Oh, yes, that is excellent advice. And I don't think we've had that on the podcast yet, but be very mindful, of course. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Keio, for joining me today. And again, to listeners, we will be featuring Pride and Prejudices on the next Activist Lawyer Book Club. We're very excited about that, so please join in. And we look forward to following your work, Keio. I hope Belfast tonight goes well for you, the festival.
Thank you so much. I can't wait. I'm really excited. I'm going to get a honeycomb ice cream before I do it, actually.
Oh, I'd say you'll be packing your bag there full of goodies.
Exactly.
Thank you
so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service, where our team using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.